โมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะพุทธังธัมมังสังฆังนะมัสสามิ Blessings. Good morning to everybody. We have a lovely, cool, dry morning in the mountains near Melbourne. It's a good day for practicing Dhamma. As you know, this is the first day of an online retreat in because it's the Vasa time, the range retreat time, is a good time for everybody, not just the Sangha, but lay people to put a bit more effort into practice of the Dhamma. So we'll be giving you some encouragement and guidance over the next few days, chanting together, meditating, listening to Dhamma, give you a chance to ask questions as well. One of the qualities that we really need is determination. Because especially if you're practicing at home on this retreat, most people are at home, you need to be determined if you're going to practice the Dhamma, because many things around you will be distracting you, or you might say pulling you away from the Dhamma, or complicating things as you practice because of other commitments, other duties, responsibilities in life. These will naturally come up even when you're on retreat like this. Say you have kids, for example, your kids will require attention, other family members, other social obligations, all kinds of things will be coming into your day, making it more challenging to practice. But that's also why it's so rewarding when you practice at home, because you're learning to keep up and bring up this determination of mind. And to be honest, even if you're in a monastery, a quiet monastery like this, in the forest, you still need determination, because our mind is complicated and full of attachments and desires, and sometimes full of suffering as well. Those of you who've been to our monastery will know in the dining hall, the other main hall here, we have a Buddha statue. It's known as the Patama Desana, or the first sermon Buddha. So it's the statue representing the Buddha teaching the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta, this first sermon that he gave on the full moon day, which we celebrated just a few days ago. And this statue, the Buddha is sitting there, and he's got his hands together. And some people explain it, he's counting his fingers, counting out the Four Noble Truths, because that was the center of this Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta. Excuse me. That was the central theme, the explanation of the Four Noble Truths. But another way people describe it is the Buddha is untangling the knots of attachment of the human mind as he's teaching. Because the Buddha was teaching out of compassion for the benefit of all beings, and he was teaching based on his own understanding of his own mind, what he had practiced, what he had understood and known. And his goal in his own practice was to liberate his mind from suffering, confusion, and he identified that attachment, craving attachment, was the cause of suffering, confusion. So he compared that to like the mind of the unenlightened person to like a ball of string, but all tangled up, not nicely, neatly kind of woven around or wrapped around something, but all tangled up. If you've ever had that problem, you have a ball of string or twine or line of some sort that's all tangled up, maybe thread, sewing thread as well. It's a problem, it's a pain. A lot of people give up, don't they? They can't be bothered to untangle the string or the thread, and they just discard it because it's like too difficult. But the Buddha, out of his compassion and effort, determination, he didn't give up. He worked on himself first to untangle the confusion and attachments of his own mind. And then he taught that to us. So teaching that first Dhammacakka Sutta is like helping those who are listening, the first 5 students, the 5 ascetics, who he had previously practiced with but hadn't reached enlightenment before. He was helping them to untangle their own minds, giving the Four Noble Truths as a way, as a method and as a teaching that they could use. So this is one way of looking at the Dhamma. We are untangling the web, the tangled mass of attachment and suffering that we all fall into in life. And it's the one thing you might say we have in common with everyone in this world. Everyone, whether they realize it or not, they desire happiness, freedom from suffering. So you could say it's the one thing we all need to do, is untangle this tangled mass of suffering and attachment that we experience having been born into the world. So what is it in this tangled mass? What is it in effect? It's this body and mind. And from the Buddha's perspective, he noted that because of delusion and misunderstanding, human beings, we build up attachment to our own body and mind with a sense of self. We call it self-identity. We attach to the physical body as me, mine, myself. We identify with it. Then we attach to our feelings, memories, thoughts and thought formations, and then sense consciousness, what we call the 5 khandhas in Buddhism. These are what people grasp at or attach to as self. And that's where this tangled mass begins. Every moment that we grasp at our physical or mental experience as self, as me, mine, myself, as a person, as a being, we start to get caught up and get caught out as well. And we start to suffer. Why? Well, the word self implies something that's kind of solid, permanent, and that there's sort of somebody there in control. When you have the idea, this is me, I'm a self, I'm a person, it comes with this idea that you're somebody there who should be able to control things, do what you want, get what you want. And what the Buddha pointed out is these 5 khandhas which we base our experience on and attach to as self, they don't do what you want. And so things get complicated, things get tangled, partly because we're trying to escape when the 5 khandhas don't do what we want, and they quite often bring us discomfort and problems. Sometimes we're just trying to control them and make them be somehow different than they are. We're comparing them, so we compare my khandhas with your khandhas, and so on. We're endlessly creating suffering by taking these 5 khandhas as self. And there's 5 of them, so it's not just one simple thing that we attach to with self that we could look at. There's 5 different strands or aspects to a human being. So it's like strands of string, not just one piece of string all tangled up in a mess. It's 5. So already that it's getting more complicated by the minute. And then we always joke, as soon as you've got a friend, say you get married or have a partner, then that's another set of 5 khandhas. You have parents, you have children, you have brothers, sisters, friends. Life is a mixture of many people's khandhas, all ending up in this very complex web of attachment, reactions, liking, disliking, wanting, not wanting. And the Buddha was very good at going back to the source of things, looking at, that was part of this untangling process. He was determined enough, patient enough, willing to look and follow these threads back to the source and see where the real problem was. And even though being caught into a tangled web of suffering, can seem very daunting, and that's why people do give up. They say, "Oh, it's too hard." Put it in the too hard box. The Buddha, by following things back, he said, actually, in terms of practice, maybe there's a way through all this to get back to the source, the origin of the problem. And that's by developing direct knowledge of the khandhas. What we nowadays tend to call practice mindfulness, or direct knowing and awareness directed to our own body and mind, is the way that we can really get to understand their nature and begin letting go of some of that craving, attachment and identification that forms around our own khandhas. So how do we do that? Well, that's what the Buddha was explaining, that's what he explained for the rest of his life, 45 years of teaching, out of compassion, kindness. He gave many different reflections, explanations, techniques, how to do that, which you might summarize in, that it's a training. Buddhism is really a training. We call it the training in sila. So just now we undertook the 8 precepts, which is one form of sila, morality, personal discipline, training in training your actions, training your speech in a way that you won't be adding to this tangled mess and complication of life by making things worse, by harming other people or harming yourself through your speech, your actions. And particularly training in the giving up of the intention to harm others or yourself. So giving up the intention to kill, to steal, and so on. That's one important part of the training to untangle the mass, the web of confusion that we're stuck in. Another part is the training in samadhi, training the mind, what we call the citta. We can use the word mind, or some people prefer the word heart. It means the same thing. It's this quality that knows experience. This part of our human being, we know things. We can feel, sense things, know things. That's the mind. And that needs to be trained. Because part of the symptoms of our confusion and suffering is that we're often knowing things wrongly or in a very imperfect way. Our mind is not very stable. So our mind is always jumping, knowing one thing to another, jumping from object to object, thought to thought, emotion to emotion. It's not very stable, not very peaceful a lot of the time. So it's actually quite hard to know things as they are, to know the truth of things, because the mind is not calm, peaceful, stable, or clear. So that's another big part of the training the mind. You might say stabilizing it, calming it, clarifying, bringing clarity to it. Then the third part of this training is panya, wisdom, or insight, or discernment. Training the mind to look at things. Once you've stabilized your speech, your actions, and you've stabilized your mind through meditation, then you have a chance to look at things more closely, observe things, as we say, see the way things are. And this is the way we develop insight, understanding. Seeing the way things are, we can remove delusion and particularly remove wrong thinking, attachment, that are the symptoms of this tangled mess that we find ourselves in. So that is developing insight into the way things are, particularly the way this body and this mind are. This is the real nitty-gritty of this pulling apart the tangled mess or knots and complicated mess of this pile of string we call a self, or mistakenly call a self. So the Buddha, through his own experience, was giving us a way of practice, developing sila, just learning to live in a harmless, peaceful way with ourselves and the world around us, other people, even animals. To develop the steadiness and the clarity and the peace of mind through samadhi or meditation. And then develop insight, discernment, by applying the mind to look at the way things are until we see more clearly. What the Buddha pointed out is when you develop discernment, when the mind is calm, clear, what we'll notice is that these 5 khandhas, this body and mind, that we take as a self are actually in a constant state of change. The physical body is constantly changing, aging every day, changing, its nature is changing because of, say, the arising, passing away of cells and the different physical experiences we go through. And then the mental khandhas, feeling, perception, thought, formations and intentions, and sense consciousness are also constantly changing, arising, passing away. As we train in discernment and insight, this is what we're revealing, what's becoming more obvious to us. And that starts to challenge some of our assumptions, the very assumption, this is my feeling, my thought. Maybe it's not. If it's something that arises and passes away according to different causes and conditions, and you have a thought and then it's gone, you have a feeling, pleasant, unpleasant, then it's gone. This is changing some of our assumptions. You can say, well, I do have feelings and thoughts and there is a body here, but maybe it's not so much under my control as just something I can observe as the way it is, but I can't control that much. Therefore, I can't really call it a self, a person, a being that's sort of under my control, and I'll do what I want, when I want, and go through life in that way. It's changing our assumptions and the way we view ourselves and then the world by investigating, by, you might say, confronting or looking at the way things are. So this is the Buddha's remedy for this tangled mess of confusion that we call life, we call ourselves. Cultivating the Eightfold Path, Sila, Samadhi, Panya, to help remove delusion that feeds craving and attachment, wrong thinking, wrong views, so that we can see the way things are. And sometimes people just sort of think about this briefly and they say, oh, that means like there's no self, so then you just die, do you? When you have insight into not self, does that mean you just die? If there's no self there, then the self just dies, does it? Well, in a way, yes, but it's the death of wrong thinking or wrong views. It doesn't mean you say you have to literally die. We're all going to die anyway, one day, but it's the death of attachment to wrong views, wrong thinking, delusion. That's what dies. That's why Ajahn Chah said that the practice of Dhamma is a bit like practicing dying before you die. Because you're seeing that what you normally take as real, solid, as a being, as a self, is actually not what you thought it was. And then people say, well, okay, so you don't die, so that means, well, there's nothing left though. It means everything just becomes empty and meaningless. But this is done in a gradual way by developing the path of Sila, Samadhi, Panya. We're putting our mind in a place where we can see that truth, the impermanence, the unsatisfactoriness, the lack of self in these five khandhas. We can see it from a place of peace and well-being. You might even say goodness, a place of goodness, where that insight is actually, the mind can accept it. Because it's not that everything becomes meaningless or empty in a kind of depressing way, but the mind is actually peaceful, stable, and just knowing, oh, this is the way it is. And of course, it may involve sometimes we have reactions when we practice. Sometimes we see the way things are, we realize something we formerly attached to as self, we might realize, oh, it's actually not me. And you have to let go. And so letting go can sometimes be difficult. Sometimes we feel sad or, some disappointment, you might say, with life because we're letting go, having realized that something that we clung to as self was actually not, and that the clinging is causing us some unhappiness. It can seem sad or disappointing. We have to remember the actual result of letting go, it doesn't lead to permanent sadness or depression. It actually releases your mind from delusion. So it's free, and that freedom brings with it its own happiness and release. And if you've ever had insight, say you've been very unhappy about something, angry, afraid, annoyed, desperately wanting something but you haven't got it, so you're very frustrated, whatever. If you've had some insight into that feeling or that thought and seeing it as impermanent, once you have that insight, you realize you can let it go because it's just causing you suffering. That release is pleasant, isn't it? You're releasing a burden, you're releasing something that was previously putting pressure on you or oppressing your mind. So having insight into not self, emptiness, the lack of self in five khandhas is actually a happy experience. And one who's done it completely, the Arahant, they're the happiest people in the world. And they're certainly not depressed, disappointed. They just know the way things are, and they're happy to have been released from their previous attachment to wrong views and the suffering that brings. So this practice actually brings us to the place of peace, happiness, not disappointment or despair. It's doing the opposite. It's actually removing disappointment and despair from our lives gradually. But maybe at first you have to trust in that. That's why we take refuge. Say at the beginning of this, we took refuge in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. Traditionally, say in Thailand, the way Ajahn Chah used to talk about the Buddha, he says, Puru, Pudun, Pubakban. Puru means the one who knows. The Buddha symbolizes this quality of knowing, well-trained knowing, the mind that has been trained to know things as they are. Pudun means the awakened one, so awakened from the sleep or the slumber of delusion. So a bit like waking up in the morning when you've been kind of suddenly, you were in a dream state and suddenly you're awake again. There's that almost like a surprise. Oh, I'm awake now. So the Buddha is fully awake to the world and to the way the world is, to the truth. And then Bhagwan means, probably the simplest translation is happy. The Buddha is happy. It also means buoyant. Like the mind of insight and the mind of the Buddha, the one who's had insight, it's buoyant, meaning it's not being dragged down or oppressed by experience. It's not drowning in experience. It's not feeling burdened by the world, say burdened by the body or the problems of the world. It's buoyant, it's happy. So the Buddha is knowing, he's awake, and he's happy. So when you take refuge in the Buddha, you're taking refuge in those qualities. That's what you're aspiring to. It's not like seeing suffering and its causes makes you depressed, and so the Buddha is sitting there gloomy, depressed. The Buddha was actually happy. Occasionally the Buddha would even tell people that. He'd say, I'm the happiest person in the world. Because he's fully enlightened. And he was the first. And he did it himself, so he's a very special, happy person. But it's something to remember, isn't it, when you practice the Dhamma, even though investigating this tangled mess of attachment to body, mind, life, and all our problems, at first it can be challenging, and we often do recoil, or we react with feeling of, oh, it's too difficult. Who can untangle all this ball of string that's all messed up, or who can look at the causes of suffering in their mind? It seems like a hard task at first. So you have to be prepared for that. That's why you need this quality of determination. You have to be determined to go through that by looking at what you've been attached to, what you've been identifying with, but then go beyond it by cultivating mindfulness, insight into the way things are. But you have to be ready to look at things and understand things. If you come back to the Buddha, he has these qualities of, he's awake, he's got this quality of knowing, well trained, and he's happy, his mind is buoyant, not dragged down by the world. That came about, these three qualities came about, it's because he was just willing to keep practicing until he'd overcome his own attachments and suffering. And then he passed that knowledge on to others. We have to do the same. We have to take the Buddha as our example. Well, he didn't give up, I'm not going to give up. And this is one way where you get your determination to practice. You follow the Buddha as an example, not just as just the philosophy or the ideas of the Buddha, but actually the example of the Buddha, how he lived and practiced. And anyone else who's done that, say the Sangha, the noble ones, they've been willing to practice and not give up. They were determined in their practice, just like the Buddha. Practicing meditation over the next few days, you'll realize, determination is one of the key qualities you need to be developing. To keep going, keep doing it, to keep focused on the practice, keep coming back to the meditation cushion or to the walking meditation path, keep coming back to the mindfulness of speech and action, keep the precepts. It requires determination to keep doing that over and over again. And like the Buddha, we'll follow the Buddha's path. And when you meditate, just in one meditation session, you need to be determined to stick with it, whether you're sitting or walking for half an hour, 30 or an hour, whatever the time is. To keep working with your mind to establish mindfulness on the object, on the breath, if that's your meditation object. You'll notice your mind keeps wandering from the breath. Like now is in the morning, people might be falling asleep, feeling tired, want to stretch, want to get up. And in a moment we'll be able to do some walking meditation. But before that, see if you can establish some mindfulness within your own body and mind while you're experiencing sleepiness, drowsiness. Or sometimes it's restlessness, you're just wanting something else, something different. So if you're at home, one of the biggest challenges is just sticking to your schedule, isn't it? You've got all these other things you could be doing. You could turn the computer off and go away and eat, talk, sleep, surf the net, whatever. You need to be determined in meditation, just to stick with it, just to keep coming back to your meditation object. But if you're, one way the Buddha encouraged us to practice, is work on the present moment. You don't have to plan your being determined, I'm going to be determined tomorrow or next year, I'm really going to do it. You don't need to think too much about the past. Determination is really a quality you're cultivating in the present moment. And where does success in, say, meditation in particular, where does that come from? Well, it comes through determined effort, moment by moment. So actually practicing in a determined way is nothing too beyond us. It's not like some amazing thing that some people have, others don't. It's really just being willing to practice with your meditation object in the present moment. Put effort into being mindful, say, of the breath in the present moment. That's where determination is practiced, just in small ways, small steps, say, like determined to be mindful of the next in-breath and out-breath. A lot of success in practice comes from just these simple steps where you practice mindfulness of one breath in, one breath out, then another, and you build up experience, you build up your determination, your patience, you build up the steadiness of mind and the clarity from moment to moment effort in the practice. So everyone can do that. Everyone can be mindful of one breath in, one breath out. It's not beyond anyone. Perhaps the thing we need is also the determination to keep doing it. Maybe that defines somebody who manages to train and subdue their mind, bring it more calm, to a place of calm, stability, clarity. And someone who doesn't is the quality of determination to keep coming back to the meditation object, keep knowing their own mind, their own body in the present moment, to be aware of posture, to be aware of the mindfulness of breathing. It's a practice that you do from moment to moment, but those moment to moments add up, don't they? They join up when you keep practicing with determination. And then many good things will come from that. As you train more in the precepts, in meditation and in insight, good results come. Your mind experiences some clarity, some peace. You can see maybe that you're letting go of certain things that you used to be bothered by. Then you get your confidence to keep practicing. If you compare yourself, say, with how you were 6 months ago or a year ago or whatever, and you in the past you've had some meditation, but then you've lost it, you stopped meditating or so on. Now is the time to say, oh, in the past I've done some meditation, I can do it, but now I'm really going to determine my mind. Now is the time to really train and use this opportunity to practice. All the teachers that we respect, from the Buddha himself is a good example, down to the present moment, Ajahn Chah, all the other teachers we respect. They've all learnt this, how to bring up this quality of determination, moment to moment, determination, train the mind, keep the precepts, you need to be determined. Train with a meditation object, need to be determined. Train in insight to see, say, the impermanent nature of thoughts and feelings and the body. You need to be determined. So that's a quality they all shared. The desire to overcome suffering, to untangle the ball of string, the tangled mess, and find the peace, the clarity within. So maybe I'll leave you there this morning. I'll finish the talk there, and then after this I'll just give you a brief description of the practice of walking meditation.
Antamayam tamakataya